Welcome.
Thank you, Michael, very much for having me this evening. I apologize for my backdrop. I've been shoved into the storage area of Café Momentum as we're hosting a North Texas Giving Day event, and they felt like this was the best place for me to be. So I don't have quite the vantage point that Mr. Holmes does right now. They wouldn't let me. They wouldn't dare let me out front, so I'm sequestered in front of lockers and a beat up sign. Want to say hello to Councilman Magoo, who was actually as well made a cameo in the NFL Network video when they filmed the dinner we did in Los Angeles with the LA Rams football team. What Michael neglected to say is that Kyler and I, both Allen High School graduates, both featured in our own presentation on NFL Network. I just never had to take a hit to the head from an NFL linebacker or defensive lineman. So while that means I have not received the millions of dollars that he has, I still have some good wits about me, allegedly. Before I start telling you guys about Café Momentum, I want to talk a little bit about myself, because I think it provides a lot of context for the need for the work that we're doing here at Café Momentum. And it starts back, I was born in 1975, and coincidentally, my mom graduated from W.W. Samuel High School in 1972. Why that's significant is because while my mom was a student at Samuel High School, her school was the first high school to be integrated through desegregation in Dallas, Texas. As a result, which on the one end means that there wasn't much time between desegregation and me being born. And when we think about the history, the racial history of our country, you know, Dr. King leading the civil rights movement seems so long ago, but in context, it really wasn't. Why that's also significant for me personally is because as Black students began to attend Samuel High School, Black families began to move into Pleasant Grove. And as Black families moved into Pleasant Grove, we saw an example of white flight, where a lot of white families began to leave Dallas and move out to the suburbs because they didn't want their children going to school with Black students. My grandparents, fortunately, never left. What that meant for me was when I was growing up, and I grew up in Allen, which is very lily white, very middle class, I spent a lot of time in Pleasant Grove. I saw a wide array of ethnicity, and I saw a wide array of poverty and social neglect. I remember being a small child and seeing my grandfather hook the water hose up to the kitchen sink and running it off the back patio and over the fence for the neighbor's house, where they filled up a kiddie pool because the next door neighbors couldn't pay their water bill that month, and my grandfather was filling a kiddie pool so that my friend that lived next door and his little brother could take a bath. Those things were confusing to me, a little overwhelming, and I didn't really understand them at such a young age, but they planted seeds in me. They planted seeds in me so that when I was in high school, I had Black friends, and we went to the mall one day. And as we were walking through a department store at the Galleria Mall, we got followed. It was the first time I had ever been followed by a security guard. But I knew why. I didn't understand completely, but I knew why. And it wasn't because of me. And I remember yelling at the security guard and my Black friends saying, "Come on, man, let's just go, let's just go." Because they knew that my anger would lead to their trouble. Fast forward, I'm a student at El Centro College, where I got my degree in food and hospitality service with a goal of being a chef and owning a restaurant. 10 years later, I did it. And the year was 2007. I'm going to repeat that one more time. In 2007, I sold my house, took all the equity out of it, and took out a loan and invested in a low-risk proposition like owning a restaurant in 2007, when our country began to experience one of its worst recessions. I spent my first year of ownership thinking that I was crazy and a risk-taking idiot. But it was right at the 1-year mark of ownership that two things happened. I realized, first of all, D Magazine nominated me as best up-and-coming chef in Dallas. I realized that I had grew the business 38% in my first year of ownership. Thought I was a risk-taking genius. And I was volunteered to go out to a Dallas County juvenile detention facility and teach 8 young men in juvenile detention how to make ice cream for an ice cream competition at the farmer's market. It was the moment that I met those 8 young men that I realized immediately that I had stereotyped them before I'd ever met them, and I was ashamed. Simply put, I was wrong, and I thought I was a better person. But when confronted with these young men face to face, I realized I wasn't. I had stereotyped the way they walk, the way they talk, their attitude towards me. And I was wrong. My running joke is almost 25 years of cooking in kitchens. I've been called a lot of names in a lot of languages and a lot of kitchens, but none of them was the name that they called me, and that was sir. That shame led to humility, and that humility led me to spend the next 3.5 hours, not so much teaching them to make ice cream, but more importantly, listening to them tell me who they really were, how they really were, and why they really were. 2 days later, the county bused these 8 young men down to the farmer's market, and they were competing against college culinary students. And at the end of the competition, one of the young men actually won the whole thing, beat out the college students and everybody. And when he won, he was so excited, and he said, I just love to make food and give it to people and put a smile on their face. And then he said, when I get out, I'm going to get a job in a restaurant. Sir, where do you think I should work, Wendy's or Chili's? Heeding the advice of my father, I told him, well, young man, whoever hires you first, and then whoever pays you the most money second. I left that day. I was really excited, and then all of a sudden I wasn't, because I realized that on the surface, he's going to go right back to the same house, the same street, the same neighborhood, the same school, the same poverty, all of those issues and predictors that had pushed him on a path to detention. But as I started to think about 16-year-old him and 16-year-old me, I started thinking about the fact that each of our lives were dictated by choices that were made for us before we were ever born. Choices that we as a society have created and made for children since we were created as a country. Things like the color of your skin, the socioeconomic class you're born in, the part of town you were born in, the resources you have available to you. All of those things matter, and yet I didn't earn any of those resources that were provided to me, and I didn't earn any of the opportunities that came with those resources. Conversely, this young man deserved an opportunity. And in fact, when given one, he excelled. And I just remember thinking, that's not the world that I want to live in. And so I have a choice. I can turn a blind eye and pretend it doesn't exist, or I can work to manifest the world that I would rather live in. And that's where the idea for Cafe Momentum was born. Cafe Momentum, as Michael mentioned, to this day has continued to be ranked as one of the top restaurants in Dallas since we opened just over 5.5 years ago. And we do take a lot of pride in that, because it does prove that the staff can and will rise to whatever level of expectation is set for them. And that's because the restaurant is entirely staffed by juvenile offenders. We are a 12-month paid post-release internship for young men and young ladies exiting Dallas County juvenile detention facilities. And over the course of those 12 months, they're working their way through every station in the restaurant. So in no particular order, they'll spend time being a dishwasher, a prep cook, a line cook, a busser, server, host, hostess. We do that for 3 reasons. Number one is they're learning new life skills and social skills, and they're applying them to the different environment that each one of those stations presents. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we focus on is to disagree appropriately. And the way in which you would appropriately disagree with a fellow line cook when you're trying to get food out for 15 tables at one time is very different than the way in which you would appropriately disagree with a customer that sat down 10 minutes ago, ordered 3 minutes ago, and I was already complaining that they've waited 45 minutes for their food. Not that that ever happens in restaurants, because customers are angels and saints. The second thing they're learning is, what are their strengths? What are their interests? What are they good at? What do they like doing? We had a young man not so long ago. We ran a special on a Saturday night and said, whoever sells the most specials gets to order a free entree at the end of the night. And this young man sold us out of every single special we had in the first 45 minutes we were open, and he wasn't even waiting tables. He was a busser, and he realized, I'm the first person to talk to that table because I go pour their waters. So DJ deployed a sales pitch and ended it with, so you just let your server know that DJ told you to order the special. And in 45 minutes, he had a free entree. And what I love about that story in particular is that is a skill that exceeds my industry. That's a skill, in fact, that when I told that story to the Dallas Bar Association, every one of them said, oh, he could be an attorney. To which I responded, it does not speak well of you all, but yes, indeed he could. The third thing, and maybe most important, is they're learning what it means to be a team player. And team player is a two-way street, right? Team player means I need to be a team player, but team player also means that I have a team that I get to play on. And for so many of them, when their life is based on survival, when their life is based on getting by day to day to day, you, are not afforded the opportunity to be a team player to others, and B, you don't have anybody else looking out for you and trying to do their best so you can do your best. While all of that's going on, we also have a community services center adjacent to the restaurant, and that houses an entire team of case managers, senior director of programs, director of clinical, staff psychologist, program coordinator, curriculum coordinator, education coordinator, that work to build an ecosystem of support around these young men and women so that we can holistically address all the issues and barriers that have previously pushed them on a path to detention. Things like housing. In 2019, we worked with 182 young men and young women who were coming out of juvenile detention, and 42% of them were homeless. That number has been as high as 62% in the past. We can't expect them to learn life skills and social skills if they don't know where they're going to sleep at night. And unfortunately, working with 15 to 19-year-olds, you hear too many times over and over again that homeless also means abandoned. It means that they don't just have a place to live, they have no one, no family assisting them in finding a bed to sleep on or a roof over them. So our case managers go in and look to create stabilization. So they focus on housing, they focus on food insecurity, they focus on healthcare. We have a partnership with Parkland so that all of our interns not only have access to free medical care, but they have access to an actual primary care physician. And within the first 6 weeks of them entering our program, they're going and getting a physical. There's obvious reasons why that's important, but the underlying reasons is, for a population of young people that doesn't trust anything that's institutional, the healthcare is an institution that they don't trust. Not that any of us trust insurance and so forth, but they don't trust any institution, which means that in lieu of going and getting themselves taken care of, that they become ill or looking at preventative care, they wait till things are dire or things are drastic. Things that cause them to no longer be able to work or show up for work on time or show up for work regularly. Things that prevent them from being a good family member, things that prevent them from being a good community member. And so once we've created that stabilization, we go on to things like financial literacy training, sex education training, helping them get government issued IDs, bank accounts. We also have our own high school. One of the things that we began to notice is a high percentage of the kids come to us and they're already high school dropouts. In fact, last year, over 54% of them were high school dropouts. And I would argue that 45 of the other 46% were official paperwork signatures away from being a high school dropout. On average, and on average, they dropped out because they're 2 or more years behind. And school is yet another one of those institutions that they don't trust. In fact, school is one of the first places that ever made them feel bad or made them feel dumb. We recognize the importance of education. We recognize the importance of the accomplishment of education and graduation. We also recognize that a lot of our kids, because they're so far behind, because they have a stigma about school, because it's difficult to access an educational institution or facility that can work with them when they're so far behind, we built our own high school. And in fact, in spite of the pandemic going on, 10 of our former high school dropouts continue to go to school all during the spring and graduated high school from our program in May. And today, 100% of the young people that we work with are currently enrolled in high school or have already graduated. which is monumental considering that the zip code that a majority of them come from houses the highest, or the lowest high school graduation rate in all of Dallas County at 54%. Once we've created stabilization and now we're building foundation, we go on to things like resume writing, mock interviews, and eventually they interview with one of our employment partners for an externship position, which allows them to work part-time with us, part-time with the employment partner. It eases their transition out of our program and on to the success of the rest of their lives. Now, I would like to tell you that this program has been well received and happily funded since the day that we came up with it, but I would be lying. In fact, in 2010, when I started going around and telling people that I wanted to open a nonprofit restaurant, taking kids out of jail and teaching them to play with knives and fire, the reaction was not so positive. And people would say things to me like, well, what are you going to do when the kids stab each other in the kitchen? Or those kids don't want to work, they just want to collect a check. Those kids have never been to a nice restaurant. They can't cook your food. And so in order to, well, for me personally, I thought, how are these kids ever going to succeed if this is what we as a community tell them they are? That this is what we as a community tell them they're destined to be. So in order to turn that negativity into support and admiration for the kids, we launched a series of monthly pop-up dinners, and the idea behind the pop-up dinners was very simple. Go on one of the top restaurants in Dallas on a Sunday night when they're closed, sell tickets to a private dinner. The chef writes a 4-course menu, and the staff to not only help the chef prepare the food in the kitchen, but serve it to the level and quality of that level and quality service of that restaurant. We're 8 young men that we would bus in from a juvenile detention facility. Our first dinner was in June of 2011, and not only did it sell out in less than 24 hours, but every single person that attended before leaving looked me in the eyes and said, you know, this could be my son. And since then, we've seen the powerful effect of what happens when a community rises and wraps themselves around some of our most marginalized and at-risk youth. A great example that we always talk about is the reduction in recidivism. It's my least favorite thing to talk about. It's powerful and it's impactful. But the idea that we focus on success as just keeping kids out of jail when our mission is to help them achieve their full potential seems a little bit silly to me. But we are successful in it. We're successful in the fact that Councilman Magoo and his 13 other city council colleagues and Mayor Johnson all now owe me over $40 million because that's how much money we've saved taxpayers in reducing the recidivism rate from the state average of almost 50% to 15%. But what's more exciting to me is when I talk to you about education, when I tell you stories about a young man that actually was one of the first ever graduates of our program. This young man came to us because he actually stabbed somebody, was in the streets trying to get money to help buy food so he and his brother weren't still hungry after dinner. So he and his brother had shoes to wear at school. He went through our program, and upon graduating our program, he went to work at the Hilton Anatole. And at 17 years old, this young man was making between $700 and $1,000 a week with full health benefits, paid vacation, and a 401k. 8 months after he graduated from our program, he became the first ever high school graduate of his family. He then went on to Richland College, where he received his associate's degree, won an award from NASA, spent, I guess summer before last now, as an intern at NASA. And today he's a senior officially at the University of Texas at Arlington, where he plans to continue his education, get his PhD, and work full-time for NASA. What I didn't tell you in that story is he's also become a father. And what I love about that is the story is no longer about him. It's about his daughters. And it's about the fact that they will be growing up in a household with resources. They'll be growing up in a household with access to those resources. And they'll be growing up in a household where going to high school and going to college are a given and not a pipe dream. I want to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing lately. Because I think it's a testimony to the amazingness and awesomeness of these kids. In March, we were struck with the realization that our restaurant was not sustainable. Even prior to the shelter-in-place orders, there was nobody going out to eat and nobody coming in the restaurant. We realized that it was not sustainable to keep the restaurant open. But we as a team also realized that the two things that we weren't willing to compromise was our time with the kids, our hours of influence with them, and our ability to provide them with income, knowing that it was going to be even more crucial in the months ahead than it was already at that current time. And so in a 72-hour span, with the help of Councilman Magoo and several other amazing people, we converted our restaurant into a food distribution hub. And over the first 14 weeks that we were closed, we produced over 350,000 meals for students in the Richardson ISD's, for food insecure students in the Richardson ISD school district, including the Lake Highlands area and other parts of Dallas. And now that we're done with that, we're gearing back up. And as I believe was mentioned earlier, the restaurant is opening again next week. So if you are the type that would like to venture out to eat and feel comfortable doing so in a very safe environment, then I encourage you to please go on to Resy and make your reservations with us. If you're not, then I encourage you to please log into Favor and order to go from us. And if you're the type of person that just really doesn't like to eat good food, then I say, God bless you. But you can also go to cafemomentumgoods.com and buy some of our newly launched retail line. No, you may not make reservations in the locker room, Mark. I apologize, but this is a certain sanctuary for the young people, and they just don't trust people like you around their personal goods. There's rumors going around the Exchange Club, and until those get resolved, we just can't let you back here with the lockers. I'm sorry. Mr. Boyd said smart.
Well put.
But we have some wonderful new apparel, and we also we make everything scratch here. So we cure our own meats and make our own charcuterie. We make our own cheeses. We roll our own pastas, and we make our own vinegars. We make our own spice rubs. We dry our own chilies and make our own powders, and a lot of that is available online at cafemomentumgoods.com. And then the third way is, of course, today is North Texas Giving Day. And if you feel it in your heart, no gift is too small. And in fact, we have two benefactors at a total of $40,000 that are matching donations right now. So just know that your donation, when you make it, is doubled. And with that, I say thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to speak to an esteemed group. Your reputation precedes you. And I'm grateful for what you do for the Lake Highlands community. I'm a little nervous that my favorite city councilman is currently driving right now while watching this. So I want to be careful. We don't need anything happening to precious cargo, Councilman Magoo. But I would love to entertain any questions that you guys may have. I can open up the chat and read them, or you can just ask them. Feel free, and thank you for having me.
You have a podcast with more of these great stories. I feel like you've barely scratched the surface tonight.
It's funny you should ask that. It's in the works. We're actually working on. I'm actually gonna answer Mr. Boyd's question. What's next for CM while involving the podcast? I'm gonna kill two birds with one stone. We've spent the last year and a half looking at what expansion looks like, what scaling looks like, and we've had the good fortune of working with the National Football League and Players Coalition and leveraging their support in our work to launch a national series of those pop-up dinners. And we did one in April of 2019 in Nashville, the night before the NFL draft. We did the one, as I mentioned earlier, September of last year, in Los Angeles, and we did one in January in Miami at the Super Bowl. what that's afforded us the opportunity to do is to begin to build our network and begin to build our resource bank of organizations in those cities that are doing work with our population of kids, solicit the support of key individuals in those cities, whether they be government officials or juvenile department officials or philanthropists. And amidst all of that, about 4 months ago, received a substantial amount of money from an organization out of Washington, D.C. called the Stand Together Foundation, which has allowed us to launch our parent company, Momentum Advisory Collective. And we have already set our sights on our first 2 cities to expand into in 2021. I'm not at liberty to reveal the names of those cities quite yet. But through the expansion of Momentum Advisory Collective, we've actually been bringing in a national team of experts focused on our expansion and growth. And one of those experts is actually working with us to promote our message. Our goal with Momentum Advisory Collective is to create an impact that supersedes just the expansion of our physical operations, but begins to build a new narrative and begins to reform the way the juvenile justice system operates, so that we become the new model for juvenile justice in our country. Because if one thing that we know is, I always catch myself and say the juvenile justice model is broken. It's not broken. It's actually doing exactly what it set out to do. And so we need to rebuild that model, so that when the kids that we work with that come from the circumstance and trauma that they've experienced their entire life, when they finally, they're not even messing up, they're just trying to survive. And instead of taking a child that's trying to survive and putting them in handcuffs and putting them in jail, we need to put our arms around them, and we need to tell them that we're going to help them achieve their full potential. So that's kind of our goal, and that's part of building that narrative. And that's where something like a podcast comes from, is because I think people need to know these stories, and people need to understand that we as a community have the ability to create that impact. And yes, Mr. Boyd, we would love a restaurant in Lake Highlands as well, but Councilman Magoo has turned that down repeatedly, says that he doesn't care for Cafe Momentum.
All right. That's a lie. You were doing so good, man. One of my favorite human beings on this planet right here, doing God's work all over the place. And yes, we even got a spot at Bonton Village coming in if we need a little opportunity there. So we'll beg and plead for Chad to come up to Lake Highlands.
I think there's legal issues around me and Darren Babcock being in the same place at the same time, because I think no, we want to continue to grow and expand our model in Dallas and around the country. For us, it's about, in order to help these kids achieve their full potential, we have to be able to rally national attention around them and begin to allocate resources to them. I think a really impactful and powerful story that I watched play out during this pandemic is, for about the first 4 to 6 weeks that the pandemic really began to sweep through our city, our kids were completely unaffected. In fact, because all of the crisis, the toilet paper crisis, the flour crisis, the yeast crisis, all of these things that we were going through and experiencing, that's normal to them. Their lives are normally deprived of resources or have a scarcity of resources, or sometimes this is available, sometimes it's not. It's completely normal to them. But what you see that happens time and time again is when people with means and affluence begin to run low on a resource, that resource begins to be pulled from other communities. And unfortunately, what that means is being pulled from the communities that the kids come from. So about 4 to 6 weeks in, they went from having scarcity of resource to no resource. And that actually created, and a lack of jobs, and a lack, which was already lacking to begin with, but made it even worse. And that's when they actually began to get really, really scared. And that for us was also an example of why on any given day, the work that we do is important, but how much more important it is and is going to be as we come out the other side of this, because their communities are going to be the most affected and the most deprived of those resources.
Hey, Chad, Bill and Adam kind of touched on this, but I've worked downtown for almost 30 years now, and downtown has different advantages and challenges. And I wonder what that presents to you there. And, when I get home at night, I rarely think about going back downtown for dinner. And I just kind of wondered how having a downtown restaurant in operation is different than if you were in Lake Highlands or Park Cities or Uptown or wherever.
Well, I will tell you that's a phenomenal question, because if I had my druthers, we would never have a restaurant in downtown Dallas, because it is the most difficult location in this city to bring in diners. Unfortunately for us, it really came down to public transportation. And I'll give you an example. Prior to the restaurant opening, I would help kids try to help them secure jobs. And one young man lived in Hutchins, right at the intersection of 45 and 20. And I drove him from there to Bishop Arts to interview for a job at one of the restaurants down there. It was a 12-minute car ride. While he was interviewing, I looked it up, and it was an hour and a half and 4 bus transfers each way. It was a 3-hour commute. So for us to find the best possible scenario for the kids to be able to access the restaurant, because we're working with the Dallas County Juvenile Department, which means they're coming from all over the county. We had to go downtown because it was the path of least resistance and getting them to and from work in the easiest possible way. So if anybody knows anybody on DART, we can just tear down that whole system and rebuild it. That would be great. Shouldn't take very long at all.
For sure. Okay, I'm giving a little pause here. If anybody else has anything else, take your shot. I don't think I can say enough just how impressive Café Momentum is, the work that you're doing down there, Chad, the impact that y'all have had. And I know I speak for everyone in the club that we appreciate you, appreciate what you're doing, and fully support you. And I know that the folks that weren't already aware of what y'all are doing are ready to jump on board at this point and help out. So thanks for taking your time away from your fundraising event this evening. And hopefully we haven't kept you from all the good stuff, and you can get back in there and enjoy some time with your benefactors. But thank you so much for talking to us. I definitely look forward to the podcast, because I was thinking the whole time you were talking, man, I could just sit and listen to these stories all night long. It's inspiring. It's sobering. And we thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you very much for having me. Sincerely, thank you.
You bet. All right. So to wrap up, speaking of benefactors and helping out, jump on that link. I'm going to paste it into the chat window one more time so you don't have to scroll to look for it. Get in there and make a quick donation before you log off for the evening. Remember that our next meeting is October 2nd at the KC at 7 a.m. We'll be in person with the virtual Zoom option, which will go out via the newsletter. Adam, if you're available and not too focused on driving and have anything to share, go right ahead. 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
I'm here. I would just say the biggest thing going on right now is as many of you know, is our budget. I want to thank those that came out and wrote emails and spoke and advocated last week. We at least temporarily have been able to save our SRO funding in RASD. I'm hearing rumblings even during this meeting a little bit earlier that some of the folks are trying to do another amendment, and we're still trying to figure out the $7 million in overtime that was cut. I'm sitting here thinking, how do I draft an amendment that puts more money in Café Momentum to do more of what they're doing? But there's still battles to be fought between now and next Wednesday when we vote finally on this budget. So I would just stay engaged. Thanks for what everybody's doing so far, but it'll be an interesting time. I will to try to give some piece to the discussion for those of you that are concerned. I've been confirmed of two things from our city manager. One is that although it's not wise to not budget for something that you know you're going to spend, we will have funding available to pay the overtime that's needed for our police department. And so while it will either come from reserves or do mid-year changes, it will get funded. And he's also confirmed to me that if we're able to hire additional officers, that the funding will not be the reason we don't do so. And so we'll see how that works moving forward too. As everybody probably knows, we did get the resignation of our chief, and we'll be starting a search. That position is hired and fired totally under the city manager. And so we as council will just be along for the ride, but trying to speak into that as much as we can. But that'll be coming up over the next few months. And so a lot going on. I just appreciate everybody in this club for staying engaged. And if he's still on, I want to say more thanks to Chad Hauser for all he's doing. And I don't think even hearing him now, we realize the real impact he's having in these young folks' lives, but in our city as eyes are opened and changes are needed and changes are being made. So I appreciate you, Chad. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Adam. And thanks for your hard work in advocating for the things that we need, and supporting our first responders is definitely one of those. So we're with you on that, and hoping for better results in that regard as the budget gets finalized, but encouraged by your remarks this evening, so thank you. With that, unless anyone else has anything, Michael, do you want to announce our program for the second, just to put it on everybody's radar?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of our recent programs, you've heard the name Communities Foundation of Texas. They're, of course, the ones who put on North Texas Giving Day. Family Compass has been able to avail themselves of some funding from them. So Wendy Burton from Communities Foundation of Texas is going to be with us on the 2nd, talking about some of their programs and what they're seeing in Dallas philanthropy generally.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That'll be a great program, something very interesting with a big reach. And I think everyone will enjoy hearing from her. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting, and those who want to stick around and visit are welcome to, until Rick gets tired of you and closes the Zoom.